"Stop her!" The shout echoed through Blackwood Mansion as a terrified maid ran down a marble hallway. A crystal vase crashed to the floor behind her. Guests turned, security guards rushed forward, and standing at the center of the chaos was Madame Eleanor Blackwood. Her face was pale, her hands trembled. For the first time in 25 years, she looked afraid, because a secret she had buried long ago was finally coming back to destroy her. But to understand why, we need to go back to the day everything changed. Rain hammered against the windows of Blackwood Mansion. Hundreds of mourners filled the grand hall for the funeral of billionaire Richard Blackwood. Business leaders, politicians, celebrities, every influential person in the city had come to pay their respects. At the front of the room stood a giant portrait of Richard, founder of Blackwood Enterprises, one of the richest men in America, a man who built an empire from nothing. But despite all his success, one tragedy had haunted him for most of his life: the disappearance of his daughter. Near the front row sat his widow, Madame Eleanor Blackwood. Elegant, respected, admired. To the public, she was the perfect wife, the perfect philanthropist, the perfect widow. Nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew that 25 years earlier, Eleanor had made a decision that would change countless lives forever. As the funeral ended, guests moved into the mansion's library for the reading of Richard's will. Most people expected the same outcome. Eleanor would inherit everything. After all, she had been Richard's wife for decades. Who else could possibly inherit the Blackwood fortune? The room fell silent as attorney Samuel Pierce stepped forward. He opened a thick leather folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "As requested by Richard Blackwood, I will now read his final wishes." The first announcements were predictable: donations, trust funds, employee bonuses. Then Samuel paused. The room grew quiet. "There is one final matter." Every eye turned toward him. Samuel removed a large stack of documents. "Many of you know that Richard Blackwood spent 25 years searching for his missing daughter." Murmurs spread through the room. The tragedy had become famous nationwide. For decades, investigators searched for clues. Most believed the child was gone forever. Samuel continued. 6 months ago, Richard's investigators received a breakthrough using modern DNA genealogy databases. Several people leaned forward. A woman named Amara Hayes submitted a DNA ancestry test. The room became completely silent. The results confirmed she is Richard Blackwood's biological daughter. Gasps exploded throughout the library. Eleanor froze. No, no, no. That wasn't possible. The child had vanished. She had made sure of it. Samuel looked down at the will. "The remainder of Richard Blackwood's estate, including Blackwood Enterprises, Blackwood Mansion, and all associated assets, shall pass to my daughter." He paused. Amara Hayes. The room erupted. Reporters grabbed their phones. Executives stood from their seats. Questions flew in every direction. Who is Amara Hayes? Where has she been? Is this real? Meanwhile, Eleanor sat perfectly still. Inside, panic exploded, because she knew exactly who Amara Hayes was. 25 years ago, she had been a baby Eleanor had ordered removed from Richard's life. Samuel raised his hand. "There is also a letter." The room slowly quieted. Samuel unfolded a handwritten page. "My dearest daughter, if you are hearing this, then my greatest wish has finally come true. For 25 years, I searched for you. I followed every lead, every rumor, every possibility. I never stopped believing you were alive, and I never stopped loving you. If I am gone when you hear these words, please know something. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. You were loved every day of your life. Love, your father." Many people wiped tears from their eyes. Even hardened executives looked emotional. But Eleanor barely heard the words. Her mind had returned to a memory from long ago. She remembered standing outside Richard's office 25 years earlier. She remembered hearing him laugh while holding his newborn daughter.
And she remembered the sentence that changed everything. One day, Richard had said proudly, "Everything I build will belong to her." From that moment forward, Eleanor viewed the child as a threat to her future, a threat to her power, a threat to her control. And eventually, she convinced herself the child had to disappear. Back in the present, reporters rushed from the room to break the story. The nation would soon learn that Richard Blackwood's missing daughter had finally been found. Eleanor quietly stood and left through a side door. Minutes later, she entered her private study and locked it behind her. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone. The call connected immediately. "Victor speaking." "Victor," Eleanor said. "Yes, madam. I need you to find someone." "Of course. Margaret Wells." A brief pause followed. "The retired nurse?" "Yes." "Why?" Eleanor stared out the rain-covered window. "Because if she talks, everything could be destroyed." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments, do you think Amara should trust Eleanor when they finally meet? Victor's voice pulled her back. "When do you need her found?" Eleanor's eyes darkened. "Immediately." Because for the first time in 25 years, she was afraid. Very afraid. And she knew the war for the Blackwood fortune had just begun.
3 days later, Amara Hayes opened her apartment door and froze. Reporters crowded the hallway, cameras pointed directly at her, microphones stretched toward her face. "Amara, how does it feel to inherit a billion-dollar fortune? Did you know Richard Blackwood was your father? Are you moving into Blackwood Mansion?" The questions came so fast she couldn't answer any of them. A security team quickly pushed through the crowd. "Miss Hayes, this way." Amara followed them downstairs, completely overwhelmed. Just a week ago, she had been working double shifts at a diner to cover rent. Now strangers knew her name. The entire country knew her name, and she still wasn't sure what was happening. Inside a private conference room later that day, lawyers spread documents across a long table. DNA reports, birth records, investigation files, years of evidence. One investigator slid a folder toward her. "The results are conclusive." Amara stared at the paper. There it was, the truth. Richard Blackwood was her biological father. For several moments she couldn't speak. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since the funeral. "If he spent 25 years looking for me, why didn't he find me sooner?" The room became uncomfortable. The investigators exchanged glances. Finally, one of them spoke. "We believe someone deliberately hid your trail." Amara slowly looked up. "Someone?" The investigator nodded. "That's what the evidence suggests." A chill ran down her spine. For years she believed she had simply been lost. Now she was learning that someone may have wanted her gone, and that possibility terrified her. That evening she sat in her small apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. Across from her sat the woman who had raised her, the woman she still considered her mother. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Amara broke the silence. "What if I don't belong there?" Her mother smiled gently. "Where?" "That world. The mansion, the company, the money, all of it." Her mother reached across the cable and squeezed her hand. "You don't need to become one of them." Amara looked down. "What if they don't accept me?" "Then that's their problem." A small smile appeared on Amara's face. Her mother continued. "Richard searched for you for 25 years. That tells me everything I need to know." Tears formed in Amara's eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something unexpected. Maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe she never had been. A few days later, the gates of Blackwood Mansion slowly opened. Amara stared through the car window. The estate was enormous. The mansion itself looked like something from another world. Every detail screamed wealth, power, influence. The car stopped near the entrance. Staff members lined both sides of the staircase, waiting, watching, judging. Amara took a deep breath and stepped out. The massive front doors opened. A woman descended the staircase.
elegant, perfectly dressed, smiling warmly. "Madame Eleanor Blackwood, my dear Amara," she opened her arms. "Welcome home." Amara politely hugged her. "Thank you." For a brief moment, Eleanor's smile faltered. The resemblance to Richard was impossible to ignore. The same eyes, the same expression, the same presence. It was like seeing a ghost. But Eleanor quickly recovered. "Come, let me show you around." The tour lasted nearly 2 hours. Every room seemed larger than the last. Ballrooms, libraries, private theaters, historic artwork. Amara felt completely out of place. As they walked through one corridor, something caught her attention. Large wooden doors, sealed shut with heavy chains. She stopped. What's behind those? The entry room. The east wing. Why is it locked? Structural problems. The answer came too quickly, almost rehearsed. Before Amara could ask another question, Eleanor changed the subject and continued walking. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain why, but she felt it. That evening, an elderly housekeeper knocked on her bedroom door.
She carried a tray with tea. "Miss Hayes?" Amara smiled. "Please call me Amara." The woman nodded. "My name is Grace." For nearly an hour they talked. Unlike everyone else in the mansion, Grace seemed genuine, comforting, human. Eventually, the conversation turned toward Richard. Grace's eyes softened. "He loved you very much." Amara looked down. "I never even met him." Grace nodded sadly. "He never stopped searching." There was silence. Then Grace added quietly, "Every birthday, he wrote you a letter." Amara looked up. "What?" Grace nodded. "1 letter every year." A lump formed in Amara's throat. 25 letters, 25 birthdays, 25 years of hope. Grace suddenly became serious. "There are things I regret." "What do you mean?" The older woman's eyes filled with guilt. "There are things I should have spoken about years ago." Amara frowned. "What things?" Glanced toward the hallway, then lowered her voice. "Not everyone wanted Richard's daughter to come home." The words sent a chill through Amara. Before she could ask another question, Grace quietly left. The warning lingered long after the door closed. Over the following weeks, Amara began learning about Blackwood enterprises. The experience was brutal. Executives questioned her constantly. Board members doubted her ability. Financial reports felt overwhelming. One executive seemed particularly determined to embarrass her. Charles Bennett, a senior board member. During one meeting, he leaned back in his chair. "With all due respect, Miss Hayes, running a diner and running a corporation are two very different things." Several executives nodded. The room became uncomfortable. Amara felt her face burn. But instead of arguing, she asked questions. She listened. She learned. She worked harder than anyone expected. Gradually, employees began supporting her. Managers respected her honesty. Even some board members changed their opinions. The more she proved herself, the more nervous Eleanor became. Because Amara wasn't failing. She was succeeding. One Saturday morning, Amara decided to go horseback riding around the estate. For the first time in weeks, she felt relaxed. The horse moved calmly along a trail overlooking the hills. The fresh air helped clear her mind. Then a loud crack shattered the silence. The saddle shifted violently. Amara lost her balance. The world spun. She hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through her shoulder. The horse bolted away. For several seconds she couldn't breathe. Voices shouted in the distance. Staff members rushed toward her. As they helped her sit up, she looked toward the mansion.
On a distant terrace stood Eleanor, watching. Their eyes met, then Eleanor calmly turned away. That night, Grace entered the stable alone. Something bothered her. Years of experience told her the accident wasn't normal. She examined the saddle carefully. Minutes later, her face turned pale. One of the leather support straps had been partially cut, not broken, cut deliberately. Grace stared at the evidence. Her hands trembled. 25 years ago, she remained silent. She would not make the same mistake twice. Late that night, she knocked urgently on Amara's bedroom door. Amara opened it immediately. One look at Grace's face told her something was wrong. What happened? Grace stepped inside. The accident wasn't an accident. Amara felt her stomach tighten. What do you mean? Grace swallowed hard. The saddle was sabotaged. Silence filled the room. Someone had tried to hurt her, maybe even kill her. And suddenly, Blackwood Mansion felt far more dangerous than it had ever seemed.
Amara barely slept that night. She sat beside her bedroom window watching rain slide down the glass while Grace's words echoed through her mind. The saddle was sabotaged. Someone had deliberately tampered with it. Someone inside Blackwood Mansion wanted her gone. The question was no longer whether she was in danger. The question was who was behind it. The following morning, she walked into Richard Blackwood's private study. The room had become her refuge. Whenever the mansion felt overwhelming, she found herself returning there. It felt like the only place where Richard was still present. She looked around the room. Books, photographs, awards, memories. Then her eyes settled on the investigation files. An entire wall was filled with them. 25 years of searching, 25 years of refusing to give up. She pulled one file from the shelf, then another, and another. Hours passed. Report after report told the same heartbreaking story. Lead discovered. Investigation launched. DNA tested. No match. Hope. Then disappointment. Again and again. Finally, something caught her attention. A familiar name. Margaret Wells. She appeared throughout several reports, always connected to the day she disappeared, always mentioned briefly, never fully explained. Amara pulled every file containing Margaret's name. By sunset, one thing was clear. If anyone knew what happened 25 years ago, it was Margaret Wells. That evening, Grace entered the study carrying tea. When she saw the files spread across the desk, her expression changed. "You found Margaret's name?" Amara slowly nodded. "You know who she is?" Grace looked away. For several moments she remained silent, then she sighed. She was a nurse. A nurse at the mansion? Yes. Amara leaned forward. "Grace, what aren't you telling me?" The older woman lowered her eyes. Guilt covered her face. "I suspected something years ago." "What?" "I overheard conversations." "What conversations?" Grace hesitated, then whispered, "The kind that kept me awake for years." Amara's heart pounded. "You think someone was involved in my disappearance?" Grace nodded. "I do." "Who?" The housekeeper slowly looked toward the door, almost as if someone was listening. "I don't know enough to prove it, but you suspect someone." Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. 2 days later, Amara tracked down Margaret Wells. The retired nurse lived in a small nursing home several hours away. Nothing about the place suggested secrets. Nothing suggested scandal. Yet the moment Margaret opened the door and saw Amara standing there, she froze. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Margaret whispered, "Oh my God." Tears filled her eyes. "You look exactly like him." Amara felt a chill. "You knew my father." Margaret nodded. "Yes." Inside the room, the atmosphere felt tense. Nervous, almost fearful, Amara sat across from her. "I found your name in my father's investigation files." Margaret stared into her teacup. "He never stopped searching." "No, he never did." Amara took a deep breath. What happened 25 years ago? Margaret immediately looked away. Fear flooded her face. "I can't. Please." "No." The answer came too fast, almost automatic, like she had rehearsed it for decades. Amara left that day with no answers, but she wasn't giving up. Not anymore. Over the following weeks, she returned again and again. Sometimes they talked about Richard. Sometimes they talked about ordinary life. Sometimes Margaret refused to speak at all. Slowly, trust began to form. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Margaret broke down. Tears streamed down her face. Her hands shook uncontrollably. "I've carried this secret for too long." Amara remained silent, giving her time, giving her space. Finally, Margaret looked up. "The day you disappeared wasn't an accident." Amara's heart raced. She already suspected that, but hearing someone confirm it felt terrifying. Margaret wiped away tears. "I never wanted to hurt you." The room became silent. Then came the truth. "Madame Eleanor ordered me to take you away." The words hit Amara like a punch. "What?" Margaret sobbed openly. "She said Richard could never know." Amara stared at her, unable to speak, unable to breathe. The woman who welcomed her into the mansion, the woman who hugged her, the woman who called her family, had stolen her entire life. Margaret slowly stood and walked towards a wooden chest. She removed a small box. Inside were documents, photographs, hospital records, letters.
Evidence. Years of evidence. I kept everything. Amara looked through the contents. Every page strengthened Margaret's story. Every page pointed toward Eleanor. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Amara whispered. Margaret's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid." She explained everything. The threats, the intimidation, the warnings. Eleanor had threatened her career, her reputation, even the family that eventually adopted Amara. "I thought speaking out would put you in danger." For the first time, Amara understood. Margaret hadn't stayed silent because she didn't care. She stayed silent because she was terrified. Meanwhile, back at Blackwood Mansion, pressure was building. Reporters were asking questions. Investigators were reviewing records. Lawyers were requesting documents. The story was becoming national news. Inside her office, Eleanor paced nervously. She had spent decades controlling every situation. This time felt different. This time she wasn't in control. Victor noticed immediately. For 30 years he had worked beside her, yet he had never seen her this frightened. One afternoon he finally asked, "What exactly is going on?" Eleanor forced a smile. "Nothing." Victor frowned. "Then why are investigators calling every day?" "It's just media attention." "You're lying." The room fell silent. Eleanor's expression hardened. "Be careful, Victor." Victor immediately stepped back. He had never seen that look before, and for the first time he wondered if he truly knew the woman he worked for. Days later, national headlines exploded. Police reopen Blackwood kidnapping case. The pressure intensified overnight. Former employees were questioned. Archived records were reviewed. Investigators requested decades of documentation. Eleanor could feel the walls closing in. Then a formal notice arrived. Authorities wanted access to records she had spent years protecting. Her hands trembled as she read it. For 25 years she had controlled the narrative. Now she was losing control, and she knew it. The following morning, Amara received a handwritten invitation, a private dinner, Saturday evening, Blackwood Mansion, just the two of them, signed by Eleanor. Grace immediately frowned when she read it. No. Amara looked up. No. Don't go. I have to. Grace shook her head. She's dangerous. Amara folded the note. That's exactly why I need to go. What if it's a trap? Amara looked her directly. Then I'll finally know the truth. Earlier that day, she had already met with investigators. A plan was in place. Hidden inside a silver pendant around her neck would be a recording device. Every word would be captured, every confession, every lie. If Eleanor wanted one final conversation, Amara was ready. Outside, dark storm clouds gathered above Blackwood Mansion, and somewhere deep inside the estate, a woman who had spent 25 years hiding the truth was running out of time.
Thunder shook the windows of Blackwood Mansion. Rain pounded against the glass as servants hurried through the halls preparing for dinner. The storm outside seemed alive, restless, dangerous, much like the people inside the mansion. Amara stood alone in her room, fastening a silver pendant around her neck. Hidden inside was a tiny recording device. She looked at her reflection. A year ago, she had been worried about rent. Now she was preparing to confront the woman accused of stealing her entire life. A soft knock came at the door. Grace stepped inside. She looked worried, more worried than Amara had ever seen her. You can still cancel. Amara smiled sadly. No, Amara, I need answers. Grace lowered her eyes. I should have spoken years ago. You were scared. I was a coward. The words came out instantly, as if she had carried them for decades. Tears filled her eyes. I watched your father suffer. Her voice trembled. I watched him search every year. She wiped away tears, and I stayed silent. Amara gently squeezed her hand. You helped me when it mattered. Grace shook her head. Promise me something. What? If anything feels wrong. She paused. Leave immediately. Amara nodded. I promise. A few minutes later, she entered the dining room. A long table stretched across the room. Candles flickered. Lightning flashed outside. At the far end sat Madame Eleanor Blackwood, waiting, watching, smiling. Thank you for coming. Amara sat down. Let's not pretend this is a friendly dinner. The smile disappeared. For several moments, neither woman spoke. The silence felt heavy, dangerous. Finally, Eleanor set down her wine glass. You've been asking questions. Yes. You found Margaret. Yes. Eleanor slowly nodded. I expected you would. Amara stared directly at her. Why? The older woman's expression hardened. Because you remind me of Richard. The answer surprised Amara. What does that mean? Eleanor laughed bitterly.
It means you never stop digging. Lightning flashed again. For a moment, the room seemed frozen in time. Then Eleanor stood. She walked towards the fireplace, and for the first time, she stopped pretending. When your father held you for the first time, he couldn't stop smiling. Amara remained silent. He adored you. Eleanor's voice became colder. I spent years helping him build Blackwood Enterprises. She turned around. I stood beside him through every success. Her eyes narrowed. Then suddenly, none of it mattered. Amara felt her heart pounding. What are you talking about? Everything changed when you were born. The bitterness in her voice was impossible to miss. One day, I overheard Richard speaking with his attorney. She laughed softly. He said everything would belong to his daughter. The laughter vanished. Everything. Amara stared at her. The truth was finally coming out. Eleanor continued. I convinced myself I deserved better. She took a deep breath.
Then I convinced myself I was protecting my future. Another pause. Then I convinced myself I was protecting the company. She looked directly into Amara's eyes. Eventually, I stopped caring what lie I told myself. The room fell silent. Amara's hands tightened beneath the table. Every word was being recorded. Every confession. Every admission. Years of lies were finally collapsing. Then Eleanor said the words that changed everything. I ordered Margaret to take you away. Amara stopped breathing. Even though she already knew the truth, hearing it directly felt devastating. Eleanor continued, as if years of guilt were pouring out all at once. She admitted threatening Margaret. She admitted hiding records. She admitted manipulating investigations. She admitted destroying evidence. By the time she finished, tears stood in her eyes. I got everything I wanted. She looked around the dining room. The company, the power, the influence. Her voice cracked. And none of it made me happy. For a brief moment, she looked less like a villain and more like a woman destroyed by her own choices. Then flashing lights appeared outside the windows. Police vehicles, investigators. Reality hit her instantly. Her confession had trapped her. It's over, Amara said quietly. Eleanor stared at the flashing lights. No! The word barely escaped her lips. No! Panic suddenly replaced calm. You planned this. You left me no choice. You tricked me. Amara stood. You stole 25 years from me. The words hit harder than any accusation. For the first time, Eleanor seemed to understand the damage she had caused. Then something inside her broke. She turned and ran. At that exact moment, Victor entered the hallway carrying a box of documents. He had arrived to deliver records. Instead, he overheard enough of the conversation to understand everything. His face turned pale. For 30 years, he believed Eleanor was protecting the family. Now he knew she had destroyed it. When he entered the dining room, Amara immediately understood. You heard? Victor nodded slowly. Enough. Before anyone could say another word, an alarm echoed through the mansion. A fire alarm. Smoke began drifting through a distant corridor. Shouts erupted throughout the estate. Panic spread instantly. Victor's eyes widened. Oh no!
Eleanor, Amara whispered. They both knew. This wasn't some carefully planned scheme. This was desperation. The fire had started in the abandoned East Wing. Years of neglect allowed the flames to spread quickly. Smoke filled hallways. Employees rushed toward exits. Security teams evacuated guests. Within minutes, chaos consumed the mansion. Amara helped guide staff members toward safety. Then disaster struck. Part of a corridor collapsed behind her. The exit disappeared beneath burning debris. Heat surrounded her. Smoke filled her lungs. She was trapped. Outside, emergency vehicles raced through the storm. Police secured the grounds. Firefighters prepared equipment. Grace searched frantically through the crowd. Then she heard someone shout, "Amara is still inside!" Without hesitation, she ran toward the burning mansion. This time, she refused to remain silent. This time, she refused to stand aside. Inside, Amara struggled through smoke-filled corridors. Her vision blurred. Every breath burned. Then she heard a voice. "Amara! Grace!" Relief flooded through her. The elderly housekeeper appeared through the smoke. Together they fought their way toward an emergency staircase, step by step, hallway by hallway, until finally they burst through an exit door into the pouring rain. Safe. Only seconds later, part of the East Wing collapsed behind them. The section that had hidden secrets for decades disappeared into flames. But the truth survived. Meanwhile, Eleanor attempted to flee through the rear gardens. Rain soaked her clothes. Mud covered her shoes. The powerful woman who once controlled an empire now looked defeated. Then police officers emerged from the darkness. Her path was blocked. More officers appeared behind her. There was nowhere left to run. Victor approached carrying the box of records, financial documents, correspondence, hidden files, years of evidence.
Eleanor stared at him. "You betrayed me." Victor shook his head. "No." His voice was heavy. "You betrayed everyone." For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Eleanor lowered her head. The fight was over. Police officers placed handcuffs around her wrists. And just like that, Madame Eleanor Blackwood lost everything. The trial became national news. Margaret testified. Grace testified. Investigators presented evidence. Then prosecutors played the recording. Eleanor's own voice filled the courtroom. The confession was undeniable. Days later, the verdict arrived. Guilty. Kidnapping. Conspiracy. Fraud. Attempted murder. Justice had finally caught up with her. Months later, Grace entered Richard's study carrying a wooden box. "He wanted you to have these." Amara carefully opened it. Inside were 25 envelopes, one for every birthday she had missed. Her hands trembled. That night she began reading. Each letter revealed the same thing: hope, love, determination. A father who never stopped searching. A father who never stopped believing. Finally, she opened the last envelope. The final letter. The one written shortly before Richard's death. Tears filled her eyes as she read. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then I finally found you. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. You were loved every day of your life. Always. Love. Dad." Amara cried harder than she had in years, not because of what she lost, but because she finally understood what she had found: love. 1 year later, Blackwood Enterprises looked completely different. Under Amara's leadership, the company funded orphanages, scholarships, children's hospitals, and programs dedicated to finding missing children. The mansion itself became a place of hope instead of fear. One evening, Amara stood on the balcony overlooking the grounds. Children laughed below during a charity event. Grace joined her. "You transformed this place." Amara smiled. "My father started it." She looked toward the sunset. For years, Blackwood Mansion had represented pain. Now it represented healing. And for the first time in her life, she felt at peace. The mansion that once stole her future had become the place where she reclaimed it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, what do you think was Eleanor's biggest mistake? Her greed, her jealousy, or waiting 25 years to tell the truth? And remember, some secrets can stay buried for years, but the truth always finds its way home. The end.